Welcome to a sort of socioeconomic and political debate featuring panarchist neoconservative Bryan O'Doherty and metamodern-progressive sociologist Brent Cooper. I'm your moderator, Layman Pascal, and I have no clear idea what I'm doing. Hopefully this debate will be more civil than a presidential debate and less boring than a vice presidential debate. Personally, as a progressive who grew up in a very rural territory, I'm deeply interested in how left and right polarities play out in our attempt to forge a higher, smarter, and more humane politics and economy. But left and right can mean a lot of different things, especially in an integral space. It can mean progressive and regressive instincts. It can mean top-down and bottom-up solutions. It can mean abstract truth versus personal experience, or emphasizing personal autonomy versus emphasizing shared trust and well-being. Hopefully I'll get some good clarity on that today. I think we all know that our political and economic systems, whatever their rhetorical virtues, are massively advantaging a smaller and smaller percentage of the population, allowing violence and imbalance to proliferate, suppressing freedom, complicating our lives, promoting bullshit, and failing to represent the will of the people, while demonstrating decade after decade that we are not prepared for obvious and accumulating dangers. We all know it could be worse, but we all know that we're kind of stuck. And there are serious problems happening right now which won't go away unless the cultural mood and public policies make some kind of shift. Whatever changes we have to take into account both the diversity of human values and the difficulty of getting people to see higher truths and feel new values and actually mobilize to make a world that is qualitatively better for most people. Today, I expect Bryan and Brent to generally agree with all that, but to exhibit analytic and temperamental differences about how we should go about making a better country and a better economy. If we're lucky, we'll get some insight and maybe even some convergence, but the worst case scenario is that we just hear a bunch of interesting things. That's not so bad. I've divided up this scenario into 3 rough chunks. I'd like to get a sense of each other's visions and critiques. I'd like to talk about the virtues and insights that drive those visions. And finally, I'd like to see if we can come together to clarify the difference between healthy and unhealthy systems and cultures in general. Fingers crossed. I'd like to start with Brent, but have each of you speak for a couple of minutes, giving a short sense of how you generally think society should be better. What does a better system look like? Brent?
Well, that's very broad. I'm always on about some very basic things that should be non-objectional, like universal, completely free, single-payer healthcare, free at the point of service, always non-negotiable. This kind of debate has gone on for way too long. And Bryan even said something on Growing Down that, you know, he'd be open to that idea, right? So there shouldn't be too much tension there. Universal education, etc. These are ideals, attractors that we want to point towards, and liberal society ostensibly does that. But there's all sorts of regressions and tensions because of politics. Probably the top line for me is anti-war. I think that's a core leftist position, and everything follows from that, right? And when you understand like how difficult it is a position to take, to be anti-war, what you're up against, you realize that that's the only correct path, or that if you're not sort of advocating for that, that you're somehow entangled in a system that does regularly advocate for war as a means to solve conflict. So, and the environment, obviously, you know, we're not just like totally autonomous individuals like existing on this planet. We're sort of part of a superorganism, and there's no outside. So an honest politics has to reconcile the big picture like that, which it typically doesn't. Sort of humanist, in the colonial sense, politics like wants to expand into space, you know, aim for the stars and just spread our seed everywhere. But that's kind of absurd too. So we have to recognize the path dependence of the systems we've created, right? The violence built into the system, arguably out of necessity historically, right? But I'm arguing for a transition, a paradigm shift away from those dependencies. And, you know, the reason I wanted to debate Bryan is because a lot of that falls under the umbrella of what the left calls socialism, right? The contemporary conversation about that is very different from what people in the center and the right say about socialism as a way to foreclose that discourse altogether, that conversation. And as a result, we have a logjam or a bottleneck of policy proposals, and it's just chaotic and hyper pluralist, and there's a lot of dogma and nonsense in there. When we really have to politically converge, we have to work out those agreements and build consensus and political tipping points, or else we just keep sidestepping or moving backwards.
Okay, Bryan, without addressing Brent too much, give us a general sense of what you think a better society looks like, whether that's way down the road or whether that's the next immediate steps you feel like we need to take.
Yeah, the majority of my writing is of course talking about way down the road kind of stuff. So for me, an ideal society, I kind of take it from not from the top view down, but I really try to focus on the basic premises that sort of the fundamental axiom, if you were, that informs that the society grows out of, sort of the foundation. And for me, that fundamental driving axiom has to be ethically right. In other words, you can't start out with a foundation that is unhealthy or pathological. Otherwise, everything that you build up from that is going to be unhealthy and pathological by its nature. So, fundamentally, I believe that, that sort of what we need to base a society on is sort of the golden rule, if you were, which is basically boils down to do no harm, or what libertarians like to call the non-aggression principle. So for me, it starts there. Now, then from that point, you can build systems that take care of all of the needs of the people, but don't violate those principles. And so that's sort of where I come from a sort of political standpoint. And then, how does that so I guess the next question would be sort of how does that translate through the stages, right? Stages of development. So without going into sort of the top level things that Brent mentioned, like, healthcare, war, the environment, and so on, these are all sort of issues that come out in society, and especially at the higher levels of development where, we're getting into orange and green and people are starting to worry about things like the environment, things like social justice and so on. Those concerns don't come up before, say, green. But all of those things still need to be layered or created in such a way that they don't violate the base foundational axiom, right? Which for me would be the non-aggression principle, or do no harm.
So, Bryan, where would you agree with what Brent was proposing, and what's your instinct about where the nub of the difference between the two of you might reside?
Yeah, well, I think I don't think there's anything wrong with what Brent is proposing. Everyone should, in an ideal world, everyone would have a clean environment, would not be burdened with war, and would have access to healthcare and be able to live healthy, happy lives, right? I mean, that is sort of, those are all idealistic things that we should strive for as a community, as a society. The question is really, how do you do that? And so there's this wonderful discussion that from a long time ago, that Jeff Salzman and Mark Michael Lewis had. And Mark Michael Lewis was talking to Jeff about sort of the two primary methods of social change, which he described as force on the one hand and persuasion on the other. And that really only one of those is ethical, right? It's not ethical, it's not healthy, it's pathological, in fact, to force something on someone else. But you can persuade people, and you can turn them toward your ideas, you can help them grow. And by doing that on an individual to individual basis, everyone that sort of V meme spreads through a society, and you get upward change. You get, transcendence to new levels of development. And so, in my view, as you progress up these levels, less and less force is needed, and more persuasion becomes key. So from an integral standpoint, when people discuss political issues and they advocate the use of sort of what I consider pathological first-tier methodologies, in other words, using force against a society to bring about the social change that they envision, I see that as a pathological methodology of doing that. And I don't believe that it's necessary. I think that you can, and in fact, you would get much better results by using persuasion, and also by not getting dogmatic about your solutions. So it's not one way or the highway. There may be multiple ways of solving the same problem, right? And the only way you know that is by letting people solve it organically.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question.
It's a great place to start, Bryan. Bryan seems to agree with everything you said as general thematic projects for humanity to work on. He's very concerned that some kind of force might be unethically deployed in order to implement these solutions. How do you feel about his ethic in that regard? And do you think anything you're suggesting necessitates force as opposed to persuasion?
No. I think if that's the insinuation that what socialists are advocating for implies some sort of violence, I think that's a total misread, and it muddies the discourse, and it already is filthy. And so I wanted to frame something, though, just like a meta point here, because it's really key. Like, Bryan's an integralist, right? And with the exception of laymen here and my friends at Growing Down and other sort of people that call themselves integral leftists or integral Marxists, I've already seen a ton of criticism of integral. I've issued a lot of criticism myself. I think by and large, the community has lost its mind. The integral global group on Facebook is like a right-wing cesspool. There's lots of trolls. And, this is a big thesis for me. There's something corrupt about integral thinking. A lot of people do it wrong. And for these reasons, I can't call myself an integralist. I don't want to talk in colors or, fetishize developmental theory. And it's really, there's good intentions to do a kind of integral politics or integral sociology, but it's very at odds with what actual sociologists and political scientists are doing. They're not drawing from integral. They're certainly not drawing from Ken Wilber, and Wilber has been criticized. And to Bryan's credit, he wanted to pursue an integral politics because Ken Wilber wasn't doing it or wasn't doing it right. And I'm completely opposed to Wilber in that regard, because I just think it's irresponsible. This is an important framing point because I think integral has become very much a bubble. So you talk in that particular language and you talk with other integralists like Jeff Salzman, and it becomes circular. And neither of us are going to get anywhere unless we really try to step outside that frame. So that's a sort of framing point I wanted to cover. I can follow up if you had another question, Layman, to clarify.
No, I want to jump over to Bryan here for a second. And, I'm sure you guys both agree with some kind of critique about the way conventional integral theory has framed political progress and political realities. But Bryan, what are your concerns relative to the potential for forceful coercion of people toward the policies that Brent's suggesting that you agree with in general? But where do you think the danger lies in terms of coercion versus persuasion on those very basic things about, changing the economy, giving everybody health care, trying to draw down war, things like that?
Well, coercion in and of itself is, I guess my primary concern would be that coercion is you're never going to get authentic change in that way. You're going to force people of various different worldviews, say who look at the world through different lenses. You're going to force them into a single worldview perspective, whether that's Marxism or socialism or whatever, any ism, and I would include any ism that I would subscribe to as well. I'm not about forcing anyone to see the world the way I see it, So, and if you do that, one, it's not going to be authentic, right? And two, you're going to have resistance to that, and that resistance will inhibit, I guess I should say, will inhibit the development of the society as a whole. In other words, so say green, and I'm sorry to use colors, but I'm just going to go with it here. Green postmodern society, right, begins to force its worldview, and this hasn't been the case so much yet, but it's starting to look that way, which is something we can talk about too. But let's just say that green starts to force its worldview on the rest of the U.S. Okay, well, you've got various different cultural worldviews that are cohabitating in the U.S. You've got everything from tribalism on up in various degrees and in various numbers. So what's going to happen is, those different worldviews are going to adjust to that forced paradigm in certain ways. Some, let's say blue or amber, might take on green as sort of a dogma and become sort of almost religiously zealous about it. And we see that in today's culture a lot, with what the right calls social justice warriors, right? These are people who are fundamentally acting from a sort of an amber mythic membership level, and the ideals of green are their religion, so to speak. And then on the other side of that, you'll have people who are at the same level of development, but will take the exact opposite stance, right? It'll be an affront to their already accepted dogma, their accepted religion, and they will fight against that, right? So you'll have that that friction. So the primary problem that I see when you have any one worldview ideology being systematically sort of coerced into all levels of society is that you have this tension and this friction, and you're never going to get rid of that. It'll always be a problem. It'll eventually metastasize, and all of the social unrest and problems that we see around the world are pretty much generated from that. At least that's the way I sort of frame things or see things.
Thank you. Brent, I know you don't want to buy into developmental fetishism, but in terms of bringing forward these universal shifts toward human well-being that you're talking about, where do you account for multiple different values and worldviews and perspectives in terms of both getting voters to buy into these changes, but also ethically helping people have worlds that they can get behind?
The post-truth climate that we're in is the result of like a hyper postmodernism where a lot of competing forces that use manipulation, right? Not necessarily force, but a type of manipulation. And I think that's also what Bryan's doing, even if it's not intentional. I'm not attributing malice to him, but there's a sort of manipulation of the discourse, trying to massage the ideas rather than beat people over the head with them. And so in that environment, and it's because of like neoliberal policies that have been set in motion, but and the corporatization of media, the privatization of all these things, it's created like bad information ecologies, right? And in sociological terms, it's dumbed people down. And so this is even happened to intellectuals. We live in a dumbed down culture, and people, are clinging to competing views. And I'm not proposing a sort of kind of monolithic system that replaces all that. But I'm advocating the actual process for the emergence of that healthier discourse, right? And the reason people like me and Bryan would eventually clash, like in 2020, debating these issues, is because I think so many ideological pockets are really lagging. They're really, behind the curve. It takes years and years for us to meet and catch up, right? I interviewed Alexander Bard earlier this week, and we met 4 years ago and disagreed a lot, but it took a long time to actually open the space and set up, a discourse and creates, like foreground the tension there, so we could actually get to some answers. One of my problems with Bard is this a similar problem I have with Bryan, much worse in Bryan's case, in fact, is that you tweet tons and tons of far-right ideologues. Like, these are not serious people, and your value of the golden rule, do no harm. This is in direct contradiction to that. And, I could give you the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, well, you're doing great work on panarchy and future thinking and high-level system stuff, but then this is, you have a sort of personal gripe or grift, and you want an outlet emotionally, so you want to retweet Tim Pool, Larry Elder, Andy No, Steven Crowder, Mike Cernovich. I came up with a list, basically, all these people you're tweeting. Yeah. And this is, like, I could come up with substantive arguments to debunk each one of them. I've seen it done. And I could also just say ad hominem that these people are untrustworthy. They're generally bad people. They have bad political takes, and it creates this validation effect and this defensiveness. Like, you want to, maybe we should be debating this, not the abstract principles of panarchy, but like, what the hell are you doing with this contradiction, talking about the golden rule and then tweeting all these fascist propagandists? Like, that is literally their business model. Tim Pool produces on a daily basis what could be truthfully effectively described as propaganda for fascism. He's serving that model of governance, and that he's serving that post-truth media ecology, and he's getting rich doing it. So what the hell are you doing, Bryan?
Okay, this is a very interesting point. I want to ask a question about authentic change, but I'll get back to that, because this is, Bryan, how do you respond to the sense that people have that a lot of conservative commentators and things like that, people who you might retweet or play around with the broadcasting of, that there's a lot of implicit violence and force and regressive undermining associated with a lot of those characters? Maybe not all of them, and maybe not in every respect, but people certainly have that sense about a lot of those figures.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't get that sense from them at all. I'm just being perfectly honest with you. I don't. I mean, I listen to Tim Pool all the time. I listen to his podcast. He's not a fascist by any stretch of the imagination. He's not serving fascism. So I think a lot of this sort of framing, it comes down to a type difference. And I talk a lot about this sort of type level fallacy or whatever. But it's basically, the left and the right have similar goals, but vastly different worldviews. So for me, when I retweet Cernovich, or I retweet Tim Pool or Larry Elder or any of the others, that's because my type is agency. My type is agentic. It's not communal. And I vibe. I fundamentally resonate with what they're saying.
You're getting excited by the elements of what they're saying that your ears are emphasizing.
Right.
But
It speaks directly
Brent's
to
ears are
my
emphasizing a different feature of what those people are saying.
it speaks directly to my internal biases. And I recognize that. I mean, I'm not above that or anything. When I'm feeling a little bit red or a little bit blue or a little bit orange or whatever, and I just want to let that out, they speak to that voice in me.
This actually speaks to my argument, and it's, again, I mean, I like to stress that I'm not attributing malice or dishonesty to you. So it's great that you own the fact that, yeah, I think these people are not fascist. I think they're doing something that speaks to me. And all I can do in this context of a debate is keep trying to frame it in a sort of meta box or umbrella, because I'm trying to go beyond integral. I think we get trapped by these levels, and it becomes a mechanism for excuse and having a cop out for not doing the rigorous research about policy, for example. So, I'm familiar with all these characters though in this list. It's not that I just project onto them and I don't like them because they oppose the left. Like, leftists have debated these people and debunked these people, and we have a discourse problem that doesn't get across. And again, it takes years and years for people like us to catch up to each other and actually intersect. And the integral thing keeps going, and what Jeremy Johnson and the others are trying to do with an integral left is to try to rehabilitate a lot of what's good about it. But at the end of the day, if we're having a paradigm shift, like, none of these people, Lauren Chen, Ann Coulter, Scott Adams, Dave Rubin, I mean, this is all far right stuff. That's just objective. And maybe it speaks to some like values and identity issues you have, but it has no depth. It's not going to survive the culture war. Part of what I've wanted to do as part of the left for the last 4 years is actually, because I knew Trump was going to win at a certain point. I think people who had insight into why Hillary would lose deserve some sort of kind of privilege in the political discourse. But instead, what happened is the center and the right continue to drift right and fight over these things and punch left. Right. So 2 elections in a row, you have a Bernie Sanders campaign that did not get its day in the sun. It did not get a fair public hearing. And the evidence for this is prolific, whether it's the Vice documentary that kind of consolidates the Bernie blackout evidence, or just the obvious ways that the DNC and Biden kind of keep eschewing leftist policies, which are in fact mainstream, like, again, free healthcare, right? This is not a policy anybody on the right advocates for, even if they say they want it. It's never going to get pushed from the right, because the privatization of healthcare has come from the center and the right. So, I mean, I would just want to push all the way through all these characters and insist that there is something harmful in what they're doing. Like Tim Pool, especially, again, he's got a huge platform. He makes dozens of anti-AOC videos each week. It's just, there's not a sincerity. Just because these people talk fast and are confident, I'm sorry, you're falling for a ploy, and they're drinking their own Kool-Aid. They're drinking their own piss, and it's never going to go anywhere. And so, as forceful as I'm being, I want to invite you, Bryan, to actually work on the left, do socialist readings, like the idea of socialism by Axel Honneth. There's lots of great books you might not have come across. One thing that always baffles me when people make an anti-socialism argument is that they've not read Einstein's four-page piece on socialism, or they have read it and they just throw it out. They think they don't seriously consider the arguments or the context of one of the leading scientists of the 20th century advocating socialism. you want to instead problematize a boogeyman or a straw man of socialism because it's convenient and that fits into the integral framework better. But I would say, come do the hard work that we're starting to do in this sort of debate.
I want to get Bryan's take on progressivism and socialism, but first I want to touch in on something with you, Brent, which is, what's your take on temperamental or thematic differences in people? Like, I hear a lot from you, which is the conservatives are not really proposing policies that will actually bring about these improvements to general human life. However, I think one of the things Bryan is saying is that a lot of that is about a mood. It's about a spirit that they need to touch in with, that they're not hearing from people who are proposing good policies. And there's something emotional, maybe moral, certainly thematic and aesthetic about it that they need to hear. So what's your take on just that people have different temperaments and they need to touch in with different information sources that have different tones?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that, but I think it's secondary to the fact that people, like, whether it's the algorithms on YouTube and Facebook or something else, like something pre-social media, right? But people don't typically have the right introduction or the right access to these alternate discourses, right? Like, sociology, something I studied in university, is not something that has a kind of public forum, really. The discourses are dominated by psychological and methodological individualism, and these are things that in academia the trend has inverted. There's a pushback against that, but in the public sphere we're still locked into those modes of thinking because that's what's been popularized in the 20th century. So with temperament, I think, somebody can look at like Mike Pence, he's very like rigid, like it looks like a G.I. Joe doll, and be like, I like that aesthetic. He's much more put together. He's a family man. I can trust him. And to some extent, like my father, who's very intelligent, that's the depth of his political consumption. So there's this idea I'm lamenting that most people are reacting to surfaces, right? And so, okay, Mike Pence has a certain temperament; he doesn't fly off the handle or whatever. But then you have these people like Tim Pool, Steven Crowder, like they're just sort of shock jocks. They're sensationalist, and then that's the opposite of Mike Pence. But they're still doing a kind of conservative kind of narration, that's their anti-left. And so I don't know how much this temperament angle holds up, because people are still, look at Trump, right? Trump is the inversion of that conservative aesthetic, and people went for it. So that's obviously breaking down. There's a hypocrisy there. Jordan Peterson is a figure who's, I think, very paradoxical and hypocritical. He looks the part of a typical conservative, but sounds totally whiny and packages his resentment against the left in very intellectual terms, right? So people can go, yeah, oh, he's so smart. He's really just taking the left to task. But again, the root of the problem is that Jordan Peterson has gone his whole life without sincerely engaging, except for when he claims he was younger, he was a socialist, right? He's one of these people that, I was a socialist, but it's untenable or whatever. So I grew out of it. But really it's an abandonment of that pursuit, of those ideals, of those values, and of the actual policy that is the leverage for change. And so again, healthcare is one of those issues. It's been so deeply politicized. People don't even understand how their values transpose to policy. They just want to fight for what sounds right. So
that's an interesting position.
A long way around the temperament question.
The temperament question involves a lot of contradictions, and we could see that as the complexity or the hypocrisy of the conservative mood, because it definitely involves a combination of dominance and victimization and rebellion, of control and decency and liberalism and liberty. There's a sort of, like Trump. Trump is a very interesting character in terms of being both authoritarian and anarchistic at the same time. And there's definitely streaks of control, but also streaks of fuck you to everything that run through what we call the right and make a very complex theme there. And I might want to touch back with that, but what I want to hear from Bryan is, what's your take on progressivism and socialism? And how do you see that as different from liberalism? And what do you think the viable options for a progressive future different than the conventional institutional left might be in this country?
Well, I often say, I'm a socialist with my family and a capitalist in society, because I think socialism works on a small level, on a small scale. I don't think it works on a larger scale, and the reason I don't think it works on a larger scale is because you need a way to keep people accountable, and socialism is incapable of keeping people accountable. Not to be harsh, as Brent might put it, but I think these issues though stem from something that's bigger than just who's right and who's wrong, because I don't look at it in that frame. I try to separate my belief that that my agentic biases are correct, so to speak, and recognize that we have kind of two different types of people in the world. And these two different types, I'm generalizing here because it's a spectrum. It's not like one or the other, but these two different types are sort of almost biologically or evolutionarily, epigenetically derived. It has to do with, and there have been studies on this, having to do with sort of brain structures and epigenetics. In other words, how does nature change our genetics from the time we're in the womb through the time we're developing into adulthood in order to prepare us for our environment, right? And so that literally can inform our worldviews, whether we're more communal and emphasize that side of our sort of human society, or whether we're more agentic. That's called, they call that R selection or K selection in sort of the biological literature. And different species favor different strategies. Humans are adaptable, and so we can switch or have admixtures of those strategies. But I think that, part of the reason why it seems so intractable and seems so difficult to change people's minds is because it's partially because of that. Even our brain structures are different between the right and the left.
I think we can probably all agree that there's reasons why people are structured to think differently. But Bryan, I want to know from you, like, whether you think that types of policies put forward by someone like Bernie Sanders, who's comfortable with the socialist label, is in any way really anti-capitalist, or is in fact just a way of arranging capitalism in a way that's decent and fair? Like, is the market working under conditions of monopoly? Is the market working under conditions where people are not given the initial supportive conditions they need in order to be actual players in the market? Do we have a capitalism now that is threatened by socialism? Or is today's socialism actually a way of giving us a capitalism that might work?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think what we have today is neither. It's sort of this ugly mixture, and that no one's really very happy with. So if you look at it from the worldview or the perspective of the right, we live in a socialist society already, and it's only getting worse, right? If you look at it from the perspective of the left, it's not socialist enough. It's too capitalist. So you have these two extremes that are fighting to have their way, and what we end up having is this sort of they call it a mixed economy, but it's really just it's a mixture of all the bad stuff. Like you have government sponsored capitalist monopolies, you have kleptocracy, you have corruption, you have huge corporations pulling on the levers of power in Washington to get their way and push smaller competitors out of the market. You have politicians basically extracting wealth from the middle and lower classes in order to prop up industries and banking in the banking sector, and all of these things happening, and no one's happy with it, whether you're on the right or the left. So as far as like what we have now, healthcare is a perfect example. From the perspective of the right, it's not the socialization of healthcare is part of the problem. From my perspective, like, you could make healthcare way cheaper, way more accessible, just by getting the government out of it, and just getting the restrictions out of it, so that different practitioners of different levels can serve the public, and you're not forced to see a medical doctor to fix your cold or whatever. You can access a healthcare system at multiple different levels as the needs arise. We don't have anything like that. And the reason it's so expensive, I pay more for my healthcare than I pay for my mortgage, and the reason for that is not capitalism.
It is, Bryan.
No, it's not. It really is not.
It is.
It is the government involvement in the insurance industry and in the medical field that has driven prices up. Everywhere you see, every sector of the economy where prices go up and the quality of services go down, what do you see in those sectors? You see the government's hands just all over it.
Well, we're dealing with some kind of convergence of governments and corporations, and nobody's not involved in the situation. So,
the corporations benefit for sure.
What do you think about this? Because obviously what we're looking at is a situation that isn't just there's not enough government. It's the kind of government we've had has helped set up the kind of corporate environment that we have. So what kind of governance do you think we need in order to make both our government and our corporate and our individual world operate more freely and more effectively? Well,
my personal view is that the less government you have, the better. The more of society that can be run by voluntary exchange, the better.
Okay, let me switch over to Brent here, because this is a classic left-right issue, right? How much restriction should we have? How much government should we have? Is there a danger in and of itself in having too much top-down structure? And how do we actually get voluntary organization of people without that kind of top-down structure? Brent?
It's always a problematic way to frame things. Like, I wouldn't, even though I'm opposed to Bryan here, I wouldn't say in blanket terms, we need more government. We need bigger government. I think just framing it in those terms without getting into the specifics, and I do want to get into the specifics, we're both, using a losing proposition. Like, because when people say they want smaller government, I think you have no idea what you mean. Like, you want more and more things privatized. And so a thought that occurred to me when you were talking, I always want to try to step back and reframe these things, right? Your final point about socializing healthcare being bad, my meta question for you would be, if you were completely wrong, like I'm insisting that that's just a dogmatic right-wing talking point. Like it comes from free market think tanks. It appears to be well researched. It's just a dogmatic point in circulation. If you were completely wrong, how would you know? What do you think that would look like? What type of people would approach you and criticize you? How would you receive that criticism? I think you haven't considered those questions deeply enough. I think most people haven't. It's not just you. Most people have not, because they want to stay in their tribe, or for whatever point it is that you believe so faithfully and strongly. Yeah, the free market is going to be better for healthcare. No, I argue that that's fundamental.
You're saying that. You keep saying that a lot.
This is a fascinating point, you guys, because I want to hear Brent on this as well, which is, for both of you, how would you know if you were wrong? What evidence would you accept that would be like, oh, I've been completely incorrect about these views? And Brent, how would you know you were wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably been wrong about lots of things. You have to keep an eye out for anomalies, because when you try to systematize things and talk about worldviews, you're always abstracting and going to be cutting some stuff out. So you have to keep an eye out for anomalies, like what type of people pop up as, you know, proponents of your argument. And again, I refer back to his Twitter list. Like, those are his like intellectual allies in the public sphere. And
right, big bad people. Yeah.
I mean, look, I'll engage with any of them. They've been engaged. They've been debunked. They're just grifters. They're hyperactive. These are not serious intellectuals. It comes back to the whole intellectual dark web thing, integral, like, it's been critiqued. You know, I don't think you've seen those critiques. And so a lot of the culture of critique doesn't actually get through. It doesn't break through to the mainstream narrative. It gets lost in other factional groups, you know, talking about cancel culture and stuff like that. So those are things way beyond me and you. But I'm saying the message gets lost. The critique gets lost. How do I know I'm wrong about this or that? I mean, I try to defer to experts in different things that are out of my depth, right? And I try to err on the side of caution. I'm only confident about what I think I can prove, you know, and I'm willing to follow through on those clashes and arguments and debates, because I think they need to happen. And so, like, some of the issues Bryan's written about, I don't know how much time we'll have to go into the different ones, but like on racism and what it actually is, right? Bryan has his version. I can deconstruct some of it, agree with some of it, debunk some of it. The climate change thing, you're what I would call a lukewarmer. There's a lot of people in that camp that sort of, you're not a straight up denialist, and you don't buy into the quote unquote green narrative about climate change. Mm-hmm. My background thesis in the kind of sociology of knowledge is that there's a lot of high level misinformation. Some of it comes from think tanks, some of it starts with internet pundits, but it gets circulation, it gets amplified, and we're lost in the noise. You know, and so coming back to this issue of, you know, healthcare and the free market, this is an age-old debate, and the reason the debate persists is because of the massive consolidation of wealth in the private sector. So they actually fund and fight for that ideology, that free market ideology, to become ubiquitous and total. And so we're in an age, we're in a year where inequality is getting worse, and you and many other on the right are actually continuing to advocate for policies that in fact just deepen that crisis. And so to return to the point, we don't really have mechanisms for people to know when they're wrong and to be critiqued, to take that critique sincerely and integrate it, and not to pin it on Bryan. Like, I'm always pointing to notable figures, again, whether it's someone like Jordan Peterson or Alan Dershowitz, like they just make sure that critique bounces off of them. They don't have complex, in-depth arguments with experts on healthcare or economic inequality or politics. You know, we're just a long way away from bridging the gap between the high-level theory, which Bryan is pursuing, and many of us are, and the common sense needed to kind of be on that path.
Okay. Bryan, how would you know if you were wrong about some of your political sentiments? And maybe as an adjunct to that, what was the last thing you really changed your mind on politically?
How would I know I was wrong? Well, the two ways, I guess you could say. The first way is sort of goes back down to philosophical fundamentals. If someone could prove to me logically that the fundamentals on which I base my entire worldview are somehow wrong, then that would change everything for me, right? And that's the biggest way, right? And then the other way would simply be to demonstrate in the real world where the results of the policies that have been pursued by the left have succeeded. Good luck. Frankly, good luck. Because everything I've seen from the Great Society, War on Poverty, everything back to Roosevelt and Wilson, which were all progressive policies from the entire 20th century, are just dramatic failures, one after the other. So
you're collapsing your argument though into a hyperbole. The Great Society was an epic failure. The New Deal was an epic failure. Like, these are not serious comprehensions of those policies or the historical context.
We're just having a conversation.
Yeah, I know.
We can get into details if you like, but I've just listened to you for the last 15, 20 minutes or so, basically say that I'm not doing any hard work. I'm not looking into things. I don't know the people that I'm retweeting or know their views. I'm just, and basically they're all bad people, and it's all just a bunch of malarkey or whatever. And it's like, it just sounds like a lot of projection and shadow coming from you, to be honest.
But this is in here because I think this is more than a personal thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of, let's call them conservative rural regions of North America and maybe the world, where there's a lot of people who are hypersensitive to, people coming in from the city and telling us that we're bad people and we don't know what we're talking about and we're not competent and that kind of thing. And there's
elitism,
a voting that goes on the basis of fuck people who are going to say that to us, right? So how do we deal with that? Because part of it's just to having a chip on your shoulder, but part of it's very reasonable things saying we're not being respected by people who might legitimately know things we don't and might have some insights into how to organize systems, but we don't feel respected by that, and so we can't buy into it. Like, Brent, how do you deal with a large population block that when it hears the kind of things you're saying says, I feel like that's rejecting me?
Yeah, I want to try to be sympathetic with most people, in the sense that like conspiracy theory is very popular, and the nugget of truth in that is that people are fundamentally deceived by special interests, by the powers that be, by advertising, by their religion or whatever it may be. And so I want to kind of, say that it's not their fault necessarily, that we're all entangled in these different narratives. Can you reframe the question once more, Layman?
I would say, let's just say you wanted to bring forward the kind of world you're talking about.
Yeah.
How do you get buy-in from people who feel like the way it's being described excludes them? That it's saying to them, hey, you guys, you have the wrong friends, you haven't done your research, you're not competent, right? Isn't that necessarily going to make them want to say, fuck off, all y'all?
Yeah, it's almost not just an uphill battle, but a vertical wall. Like people on the right want you to completely come to their terms and serve them QAnon conspiracy, package that you got to smuggle in like a Trojan horse, the free healthcare or something.
People on the right want to be left alone.
that's part of the problem too, is it's very just individualist, that there's no society, Margaret Thatcher, like your problems are your problems. And the truth is that it's a system. There's no outside. So these libertarian fantasies are just that. If you want to like bring back in the discussion of capitalism and libertarianism, it has to be in a sociological frame that contextualizes those things, not saying, oh, capitalism is inherently good. That is starting on the wrong foot. And so from a public discourse point of view, the struggle of history is constantly people like Bernie Sanders or like Martin Luther King or whoever it is, like speaking up, advocating the right policies, but being subject to all sorts of like, just like being marginalized or being killed in some cases, and being, the message being co-opted. And a lot of it comes back to money, like how that is the background context that shapes our interests and our values. Like, oh, I work hard for my money. And, Bryan, you said yourself on one of your podcasts, like you want the regulations to be more lax so you can hire more apprentice plumbers or whatever. Like, okay, that's you fighting for something systemic for a personal motivation that has nothing to do with maximizing the benefit for other people. But you convince yourself that it does, because based on the foundations of like the invisible hand logic, if you want to get to the foundational arguments, you believe in that
How
principle.
doesn't it?
Let's
But
touch it
go
on
into
principle.
it.
Yeah. Bryan, to what degree are you concerned that you might be insufficiently concerned about other people and systems and community? Like in terms of emphasizing and saying, hey, maybe I'm hardwired, and maybe a lot of people are, to emphasize autonomy and liberty. To what degree do you go, well, am I not quite taking other people into account enough? Are you concerned about that at all?
No, I'm not. I'm not at all concerned about that, because primarily my entire ethos is directed toward caring about other people, by caring about their individual rights, their individual sovereignty as human beings. And so, one of the things that just frustrates me to no end is that, when I'm talking about the free market, when I'm talking about these issues, these are systems that rely on persuasion and voluntarism, not force. And socialists, on the other hand, want force. They want to force you to.
It's not true. It's not
It
true
is
at
true.
all. You're
It is
talking
true.
about foundations.
Brent, just a second. Let me ask you a question, Brent. Describe to me how you would institute socialism on even a national scale or a state scale without the use of force. How are you going to do it? Go.
Elections. You democratically elect Bernie Sanders.
That's still force.
Period.
That's still force. Force by proxy. That's still force.
No. The military-industrial complex doing coups in countries all over the world is force by proxy.
I agree.
Yeah,
absolutely
agree. Democratically electing a socialist is not force by proxy. That's utter bullshit.
It's absolutely force by
Bernie
proxy.
Sanders.
In what way do you?
One of Bernie Sanders' core principles is dismantle the military-industrial complex.
Let's imagine Bernie was elected, and he wants to make the couple of changes he was proposing, which is we're going to take the insurance companies out of the mediation role in healthcare. Right, we're going to have a federal jobs guarantee. We're going to try to go all in on new green jobs and things like that. It's a couple of whatever set of proposals that they've got. In what sense is that the deployment of force? Because if the person gets elected, isn't that the result of persuasion?
No, I mean, it is in the sense that, so force by proxy is basically where you convince 51% of the people, right, to vote in your new authoritarian regime, and then they do the force for you. So you've elected your ruler, so to speak, right? And so for all the people who don't agree with that ruler, they're being forced. Their wealth is being extracted. The product of their labor is being extracted to pay for these whatever is being put out there.
Is that not true of every election?
Yeah, absolutely.
So your critique is of the entire system's decision-making process.
At a fundamental level, yes. I mean, I'm an anarchist, so
okay.
I'm not for government in any shape or form. The force by proxy is certainly better than just overt force, but it's still force. And so
I'm curious with you, Bryan, and it touches on a lot of people who taste that libertarian virtue. Mm-hmm. Is there a sense in which corporations are not governments, or are they essentially more government?
Well, a corporation is a government charter, right? So you can't really have a corporation without a government. I would say that a business, you could have a corporation without government, but that would just be basically like a contract-based system where you would have, an organization that's created by a group of people, and they might have common ownership of the corporation's assets or whatever. And then they just go out on the market and try to, persuade people to buy their product. There's nothing forceful about that. Where you get force is when you have a government in the mix, and those corporations become wealthy and powerful, and then they use that wealth and power, that influence, right, over the government to sort of move the levers and then use that proxy by force against the population. That's where you have the problem. And so, that's sort of the I wouldn't call that. That's not the free market. That's
okay, so what kind of governance do we need that can oppose, because I think you guys probably both agree on this, corporations' ability to hack the system in order to favor themselves against everybody else's free well-being and business interests? Like, what kind of government can do that? What kind of governments, what kind of policies, what kind of setup do we need in order to maximize, say, individual freedom and small business freedom against very predatory and very deliberate corporate influence that often piggybacks on both Democrat and Republican policies?
You would need a government that essentially has no power to regulate the economy. You would need to separate economy and state.
But then how do you prevent further predatory exploitation by large centers of power within the system unless you have an additional power center trying to stop them from doing it in certain ways? Like, why wouldn't they just absolutely lie to everyone all the time without being regulated?
How could they do that?
I think we see a lot of companies that are very unpopular and yet nonetheless have an extraordinary amount of wealth and power.
Right, but in the absence...
This is my question, Bryan. What are the preconditions, the supportive preconditions that make a market work that would have to be guaranteed?
Well, a market works anytime two people come together to exchange goods or services. You don't need any overarching or controlled structure to make a market work. A market will work without any... That's the invisible hand, essentially.
Like a black market?
Yeah, like a black market.
No, black markets don't work. That's the point I'm making.
Well, black markets work in spite of the government. They work because the government regulated market is not fulfilling certain wants or needs of the society.
What do we mean by work? Because black markets create an enormous amount of violence. Like prohibition was incredibly deadly. It created mob wars and exacerbated gun culture and whatnot. So that's not working. You're saying that that's working because people are getting their goods, you're ignoring the alcohol.
You're ignoring the elephant in the room. You're ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the government, right? Those black markets wouldn't be black markets if it weren't for the government. So you take the government out of the picture, and suddenly all the incentive for violence and all of that just goes away, because it's not, what they're doing is no longer illegal. So why would they have to do any of that? I mean, you know,
I think we probably all agree there's a lot of stuff that the government leaves outside of the system that should actually be inside of the system.
well, what I'm saying is that there doesn't need to be a system. Like,
Okay, here's the question though: is if you didn't have a system, and you said, well, we're going to let everybody organize themselves however they want to. Isn't some subset of forces within that system immediately going to try to take over and institute a new system that especially emphasizes its own priorities?
you mean create another government?
What's the minimal level of system that prevents, even if you're against systems, how do you stop system formation from taking over? Don't you need a system skeleton to do that?
Well, and I go back and forth on this. I think, well, and that's what panarchy is really, is sort of that system, that's minimalist system that organizes. It's like a meta system, right? And my idea of that, and it's actually very, very similar to Marx in some ways, is that that's sort of the bridge that we need to cross over into just having nothing. You know, because you kind of got to kind of take it step by step. But
so you'd be in favor of socialism if that's what it meant.
Well, sure, but I don't think that's what it means. So, at least my understanding of it isn't.
So, Brent, you know, when Bryan talks about less regulation and more lax regulation, do you think it's about, you know, quantitatively less? Or do you think the problems he's talking about would be answered by more precise government and more precise regulation with better aligned goals rather than simply less in total?
Yeah. See, I know that there's a role for the state. I'm not collapsing into arguments. It needs to be bigger or smaller, but Bryan seems to be just an anti-statist. You know, he denies that there's any merit to that conversation. When, like, I studied international relations, like, states evolved. That's the core unit of that field. And you can't negate their existence. It's to understand it is much more complex than what most integrals are doing, and most ideologues, integral or not. But it's just being an ANCAP or a libertarian is very ideological. It means you're not participating in the broader debate, which is what I'm trying to foreground here. You're not in it. And to be in it and to participate in like a Bernie Sanders movement sort of thing, and to read the sociological and political science literature sincerely and not just find things that you like in a conservative tradition, you get blinded to the bigger picture. And so there's a role for the state. And what that role is another broader discussion. Right. But it seems to me Bryan is saying that the answer to the problem of capitalism is more capitalism. And that's just a untenable position in its foundations. And Bryan is saying, well, you know, reveal what's wrong with my foundations and I'll change. This is it basically, but it's something that is going to take a lot more work to unpack, because I think people who are ideological about these sorts of things like pro-market, anti-statism, they're just not embracing the nuance of those arguments. Like you're saying nothing public works, public education doesn't work, blah blah blah. You've said that, you know, in another one of your interviews, and that's just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not serious engagement with the complexity of democracy and our duties as citizens to participate.
Bryan, do you think you're being too like blithe and generic in the way you describe things? Like, is there left and right? Is there socialism? Did public health care not work or work? Did public education work or not work? Are those chunks of analysis too big? Do you think you should be finessing subdivisions within those a little bit more?
Well, I think fundamentally, I'm coming from it from a fundamental axiom. So I'm saying that force is bad, force is evil. Okay, so you know everything I'm talking to is derived from that. So whether it's public education or public health care or any of that, all of those systems are fundamentally based on force. So you can say that the end result is good, but what that's doing is that's just arguing that the ends justify the means. And I don't philosophically, I don't buy that. I don't buy ends justify means arguments. Those arguments fall flat for me because I think they're ethically lacking. In other words, they're not based on a fundamental voluntarist axiom of, do no harm. So we're starting from completely different starting points, and that's the problem. You cannot come to agreement on the top end in the details if you don't first agree on the fundamentals, and we disagree on the fundamentals.
What do you think would be required in order to get agreement on the fundamentals? Like, you're looking over at Brent. What would you need to hear from him before you felt like your fundamentals were being included in what he's talking about?
Well, he would have to agree with my fundamental axiom, my beginning point. He'd have to agree that force is bad and persuasion is good, and the only legitimate way to make social change is through persuasion.
Brent, do you agree with those things?
Of course, and that's why the left is anti-war and tries to use the mechanisms of the democracy in the U.S., the two-party system, which is far from perfect, but they try to use it and demonstrations as peaceful means to persuade people, to shift public opinion. Bryan is serving a stasis of public opinion that does not update and understand and integrate any of these basic policy values of socialism. And of course, I agree in the abstract about his idea of freedom, but Bryan is making it into a reductio ad absurdum, which means you're taking it to the extreme that there's some homo economicus that is so free in theory that they can choose a charter school or whatever when they have to volunteer to get a tetanus shot or whatever, when in reality that's not the government being forceful. It's literally trying to take care of its populace and citizens, and to create a welfare state, to create an education infrastructure that is robust and can't be gutted by conservatives, right? And that's what we've seen happen over the past 50 years. People like Bryan cry, oh, it's not working. It's like, you're not paying attention to how those systems are actually gutted by hyper-capitalists. And then you blame the socialists, whether it's domestically or around the world, and say, oh, look, that doesn't work. But you're not grokking the fact that, again, one of the best scientists of the 20th century who works from first principles, actual first principles, he's an actual scientist, not just armchair pundits, he's a socialist, and he's arguing for socialism. So it's about time that people historicize their first principles in order to change them, right? So I'm asking you, Bryan, to problematize and historicize your assumptions about the way economics works, because that's not how it works. And I'm not trying to deploy some like Maoism or communism or version of socialism that you're opposed to. I'm just trying to foreground what the actual political movement for socialism is, and for sort of more public sector investment. I mean, it's so basic that we shouldn't even be having this debate. You should have been on the Bernie side in 2016, and we could all be sort of moving forward together and hashing out these things in a healthier public discourse.
There's a very interesting symmetry here, because I think I'm hearing on one side that corporations are interfering with the government's ability to implement useful public policies, and therefore government looks bad because it's being hacked by corporations. But I'm also hearing that businesses are being interfered with by the state, and so we get an unjustly negative view of what individual enterprise is because it's being hacked by the state. Would you guys both agree with that?
It goes both ways, sure.
Yeah, exactly. There's interesting crossover. It's like, how do we get a correct read on what the state is doing if it's being hacked by business? And how do we get a correct read on what business is doing if it's being hacked by the state?
Well, that's the crux of the issue. Is it's almost impossible to figure that out and to suss that out. And
Brian, I have an interesting question for you. Brent mentioned Homo economicus, which is a
Mhm.
kind of critiqued concept in the last couple of decades. And how do you situate libertarian voluntarism in a world in which we know a lot of things about human cognitive bias, where there might be real situations that are of real benefit to people or of real danger to them, where just because the way that we're set up means we wouldn't agree to do the thing that is in our own best interest. Now that's dangerous, but also it's somewhat of a reality. So how do you accommodate that? The fact that people might volunteer in ways that are against the very things that they themselves value and require.
yeah, people do that all the time. People do things that are not in their best interests every day. And my belief is that people should be free to do that. It's not my place, it's not society's place to take that freedom away from them.
But what if it interferes with other people's well-being?
Well, that's a different story, because now you're imposing upon other people. So I guess you'd have to give me an example, but at any point when you are infringing on the rights of others, that's the basis of a crime, essentially.
I think that there's very obvious examples, right? Like if you burn your house down, you should have that right, unless the rest of your family's in that house as well. I mean, we can all pretty much agree with that part.
Yeah.
On the other hand, should I have to wear seat belts if not wearing seat belts would exacerbate everybody else's insurance rates?
Well, and so that can be solved by your insurance company. So your insurance company, if you're a person that doesn't wear seatbelts, then your insurance company might charge you more money for your insurance.
What's your general feeling on insurance, Brian? Because
I think insurance can solve a lot of the issues that
the kind of Bernie progressive agenda seems like they want to get a lot of middlemen out of the economy, right? You should be able to deal with your healthcare directly and not have somebody else always getting between you with their rules. And a lot of insurance companies, that's their business model. They want to get between your free choice and how things actually turn out for you. So what's your sense of insurance and of middleman economics in general?
Right. Well, first of all, I think health insurance is sort of just a weird, funky animal. And a lot of the ways that it works is mandated by the state. They're not exactly free to just do whatever they want. And as consumers of insurance, we're not free to buy whatever we want. We can't, for example, buy insurance out of state. You have to have, the insurance that you buy has to be from the state that you live in. So there's sort of a capture, economic capture going on there. That's part of the reason why costs increase. The other reason that costs increase is the amount of sort of, I guess, red tape, administrative work that needs to be done in order to just do simple things. And health insurance is strange in as insurance goes, because, like, for example, we all have car insurance, but our car insurance doesn't pay for oil changes. Our car insurance doesn't pay for, new tires. Those are things that we just buy on the market. And I think that the idea that, that we need health insurance to cover everything is maybe we could have some insurances that do that, but I don't think everybody necessarily needs that or wants that. And so, like anything else, I think the best situation is to have a market of all of these different options that people can choose from, and based on what they can afford and based on what they can, what they want, and all of these different things. And so, yeah, insurance in the absence of the state, insurance can also provide sort of other necessities that we think of as state, as sort of what we need a state for.
Do you think markets would accommodate even very basic health concerns? Like, for example, we have the right, seemingly, not to be stabbed by a stranger, right? That we expect someone to intervene if that's the case. But if we have some other health emergency, shouldn't that also be guaranteed to us? Or where do you think the cutoff would be? And do you think in just a completely open market that things like the feeling that you're not at risk of being murdered would proliferate in an open market? Or is that something we have to agree upon prior to the market?
Well, the freedom from not being murdered, I mean, you don't really have that now. The state isn't, you don't have a police officer following you around 24/7 guarding your body. So the
we have an
state,
agreement that if that happens, that's wrong and should be punished by
well,
someone.
that wouldn't go away. I don't know why that would go away. I don't know why we would
What
need the
about
state
all
for
other
that.
kinds of negative health outcomes besides being stabbed? Like, where would you draw the line? Because
I don't know that
being
you
stabbed a
necessarily need to
negative
draw a
health
line.
outcome.
I mean, I don't know that you necessarily need to draw a line necessarily. Yeah, I mean, I guess I just don't understand your question. Are you asking, what are you asking, I guess?
It's good. I'm not entirely sure. I just feel like there's a really interesting open question here about what sorts of expectations should we have as members of a society? Should it be absolutely none? Or should it be a few things, or should it be a lot of things? Because I think one of the things progressives are saying is, look, we have some assumptions, right? We have some assumptions that the air is going to be breathable, and it may not be, but we're going to act like that's normative. We're going to act like it's normative that we shouldn't be murdered in our sleep. And as long as we're doing that, why don't we add a few more things? Why shouldn't we act like it's normative that we have enough money to live, that we can probably get a job, that we're not going to go bankrupt because we had to go to the hospital when we had a hemorrhage? Like, why shouldn't we add extra things to the normal expectation of the basic framework?
The problem that you get into is that, so I see what you're saying. Where do you draw that line? The line I draw is between negative and positive rights. Okay. So negative rights are rights basically that don't require any action on anyone else's part. They require inaction, essentially. So don't kill me, don't steal from me, don't force me to do something that I don't want to do. Those are all your rights, your negative rights, and those rights are sort of like you would think of as the ones that were first encoded in the Bill of Rights, right? Positive rights are things that require either the labor or basically the labor of other people. So I have the right to an education. I have the right to healthcare. I have the right to a place to live. Well, all of those things, while that all sounds great, all of those things require something from someone else. And no one has the right to force another person to work on their behalf. You just don't have that right. Now, you can persuade someone to voluntarily contribute to the needs to the needy. I mean, you can persuade someone that it is a social good to not have homeless on the streets and to make sure that our population is educated and all of those things. And I think that most people would agree to that. But you don't have the right to hold a gun to someone's head and say, okay, now you must contribute X.
Brent, do you agree with Bryan's characterization of positive and negative rights, or do you think that everything you're proposing might actually be adequately described as some elaboration of negative rights?
I agree to an extent, but nobody is using force or violence to try to expand those rights. And look, Rand Paul has made the exact same argument that Bryan just made, that my wife is a doctor or whatever, and a patient shouldn't be able to show up to the door and force her to treat the patient. It's like, that's not how it works, though. In the socialized healthcare model, the doctors are still volunteering to provide service. When they're not volunteering, they're being paid still, right? But they're volunteering to be paid to work because that's what they want to do. And so Rand Paul's argument is absurd in its foundations. And that's basically what I just heard, that it's bringing in the back door again, this argument that a socialized healthcare system in this case, or anything, a railway system, is being done by force. That's not all what's happening. Again, what is actually happening in the world is the increased capitalization, hyper-capitalism in 2020, right? Inequality is worse. And I want to go back to a point that Bryan said in his Growing Down talk, which was that the, quote, both the Occupy and the Tea Party movement were sort of cool outsprings from civic angst. I mean, that's true. And then he says both had points to make. They almost made the same kind of point, same target, 1% kleptocratic oligarchs. That's also true. But then he says, whether you're on the left or the right, they have a lot more in common than you might think. They just see the world differently. That's not true. Ideologically, we don't have anything in common because the Tea Party does not actually facilitate solving those problems. It just serves the Republican Party in a way. And again, by the fact that inequality has increased and that more and more Americans do not have health care, and the COVID crisis has taken even more people, health care away from more people. And so these are just the facts of what's happened. And I'm not necessarily saying like just blame capitalism. Capitalism's the only problem, but I think that I understand capitalism better and socialism better because these are abstractions that are not reducible to simple axioms. They're much more complex than that. And so I'm not completely pointing the finger at hypercapitalism, but I'm saying that is precisely where we should start to disentangle the way the entire framing of our debates and discourse around things like healthcare and free markets. We're all doing the service of capital by wasting time on these untenable arguments like Rand Paul, saying his wife is going to be forced to provide healthcare. That it's absurd.
It's really tough to tell where the cutoff line between voluntary and involuntary is, right? Because you can always say, well, you know, if you don't do it and you go to prison, you had a completely free choice as to whether to do it or go to prison, right? So it's uncertain. Everybody's making a slightly different determination of what's a voluntary activity. And I think Brent probably has a larger range of what he thinks are voluntary activities than Bryan does.
Well, if I could just, address that characterization real quick. What the argument is not that, Rand Paul's wife is being forced to perform services. That's not the argument. That's the framing because that's sort of the simplest way to frame it. But it's not that is not what's actually happening. I'd agree with you. She's getting paid. That's what she wants to do. She's a doctor. But how is she getting paid? Who's paying her? How does that line of funding work? And the answer to that question, when you drill it all the way down and you go all the way back to the source, the answer to that question fundamentally is there's a gun to someone's head, you and I's head, our heads. There's a collective gun all pointing at our heads, extracting that funding from our efforts, from our labor.
Who's holding that gun, Bryan?
Well, the gun's being held by the state.
And how is the state different from what we're all doing? Like, why is it not that we are the state?
In a sense, we are. So in a sense, we're holding the gun to ourselves. But and what Brent's argument seems to be, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, but what I'm hearing from him is that by the mere fact that we all get together and we cast our vote, that takes the force out of the equation. And I'm saying, no, it does not, by any means. The force is still there. All we've done is we've increased the number of actors, political actors, to a voter base. And, the majority of that voter base gets to decide how the entire society will be arranged. And I just don't think that's right.
I'll indulge the metaphor to an extent, just so operationally we're on the same page. But if again, my example of Bernie Sanders is that he's an exception to the rule. So I agree there is some sort of force or coercion or manipulation and violence behind a lot of politics across the spectrum, right? Because it's captured, right? So there's the same corporate interests behind Biden as behind Trump. And that's why we have a choice between them instead of Bernie Sanders. So I'm saying Bernie Sanders was the exception. And also using this metaphor of the gun, there's a very real militarization of police in a police state, and they're holding actual guns at actual people.
I agree.
And it, by and large, those police forces have become, in effect, privatized and by extension militarized, and they're holding the gun at not at just anybody, but at the heads of the actual dissenters and the activists, and in some cases, like in Portland, right, picking them up in unmarked vans. That is fascism, and people get all just up in arms when that term is thrown around, because they don't want to believe it, they don't want to see it, right? But there's neo-fascism since the end of the Second War. There's been neo-fascist trends all over the world, right, and surges of left and right populist movements. But we're in a kind of era that is largely characterized for the past 2 decades by surging right-wing populism, and that those political movements at their core are sort of untenable and fraudulent, sometimes based on things like ethno-nationalism and these ideas that the state is necessarily your enemy, and you need to trust the more corporatized political actors, right? And this is the death spiral that we're in. The only way to extricate ourselves is to foreground a serious good faith discourse around socialism. And that's, again, I'm not advocating anything by force. I'm advocating for demilitarization of the world.
I'm intrigued here because there's a lot of agreement, right? Like, I'll bet you're both against Obamacare. I'll bet you're both against the liberal establishment. I bet you're both against militarization. We just covered that. But you're against it in a way through two polarized, temperamentally distinct attitudes. And what I'm wondering is, can those come together, right? Is there an institutional left power structure that's unsatisfying to progressives and unsatisfying to conservatives, that is so powerful and so entrenched and so full of rhetorical bullshit about what it's actually up to, that it can only be overcome by some sort of collaboration between higher level conservatives and higher level progressives? Do you guys think that's a possibility? Brent?
I definitely advocate for it. I don't know what it would look like, because I'm constantly looking for allies on the right, people who are sincere and, again, don't kind of identify with this package deal of these reactionaries like Dave Rubin. What does Dave Rubin want? He has no values, no essence. He's just a talk show host who makes a lot of money by moving to the right. That's his. I don't want to call it a grift, because that just causes a sort of division. Does he do it on purpose? What do we mean by grift? Or that's just ad hominem. But it fits the bill, and that's the trend we've seen is ultimately a disengagement. And while they're drifting to the right, they don't know who their real who progressives on the right are, right? And so again, they gravitate just by default back to people like Trump. So it's such a non-starter to me to say, for example, that you have to be a Trump supporter if you're conservative, right? Like the metamodern conservatives we know, right? Justin Carmian, he's very sensible, easy to talk to, but ultimately he supports Trump. I'm saying you don't have to support Trump. That's not a starting point for any kind of evolution of conservatism. So, we definitely need some sort of coalition, and Biden is trying to build a centrist coalition. He's trying to attract Republican votes, and I don't know if that's going to work, but ultimately it's insincere, because I think the majority of progressive people are on what the center and the right call the far left. That's what they call it. They say, oh, you're way over there. And like, we don't even want to talk to you. We're just going to punch left like Tim Pool does on a daily basis. All of that has to change. And then we can work together. It's not going to start with Brett Weinstein's Unity 2020. That's the IDW thing. It's been misguided the entire time. Anytime there's been debunks, it's been deflected, or there's been ad hominems against the left critics, and just a failure to admit how wrong and entangled most of us are in these ideological currents.
Bryan, I mean, it seems pretty clear to most people that there's a quote unquote leftist institutional power structure that has a lot of sway in academia, politics, and the media, but that it's critiqued from both the progressive side and the conservative side. And what do you see as the possibilities for some kind of complementary forward movement from the progressives and the conservatives against, a liberal status quo?
Well, I mean, that is essentially what I've been working on with panarchy. The way I see panarchy is it allows the left to be the left, and it allows the right to be the right, and that those two sides don't necessarily have to be fighting each other. What we have currently is either the right wins or the left wins, and they take it all. And that's where the rub comes from. And so my panarchy proposal is really just to try and eliminate the rub, to get that sort of out of there, so that us people on the right can have our agora, and the people on the left can have their commune, and that the two can trade together and the two can coexist. That's the vision. Okay. But where we are right now is pretty far away from that. And I don't think Biden's going to get us any closer. I don't think Trump's going to get us any closer. I don't think Bernie would get us any closer. So it's a difficult question, because I think, it really does require a fundamental paradigm shift in the way we think about everything from culture to society to economics. I mean, just everything.
It's hard to imagine how that paradigm shift comes about, right? If you don't think any of the major political options in the current situation will get us any closer, what do you think would get us any closer? Like, let's say that's the vision, panarchy's the vision. Let's imagine we were going to get there in 50 or 100 years. What sorts of politics in the moment, of the kind of options we have at our disposal in terms of mass voter mobilization, which ones are going to move us in that direction? Which ones are going to set us up so that the people in 50 years are the kind of people who can make that paradigm shift?
I think, there's a number of ways. So politically, what you have to do, I believe, is weaken the establishment politics. Okay. And how we do that, I believe, is by supporting candidates that the establishment obviously doesn't like. So those would be on the left, those would be candidates like Bernie Sanders. But on the right, those would be candidates like Trump. Okay. And so regardless of your leanings, whether you lean right or left, my suggestion would be to try and support those candidates that the establishment is obviously very against. That'd be one. The second thing I think we could do is practice counter-economics to the degree possible, or to the degree that's safe for you. I don't want anyone to go to jail.
What's your definition of counter-economics?
So I described counter-economics in the Growing Down podcast that I did. But basically what it is there are sort of, if you were to take a 4-quadrant economic model, right, there are 4 markets, okay? And those markets are the white market, which is legal and regulated, the gray market, which is legal and unregulated, the black market, which is illegal and unregulated, and then the red market, which is, black market is illegal. I'm sorry, illegal and unregulated. And the black market is, or the red market, which is basically it involves all those things like, murder for hire and shit like that. So, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to emphasize the gray and black markets. Okay, so you're trying to basically those two markets strip the state of their power, because they exist and they function outside of the state's purview. So what you're doing is, you're to the extent possible, you're not supporting the system.
Brent, if you were to take seriously Bryan's vision and say that panarchy is a good solution in 50 or 100 or 200 years, what kind of state do we need at the moment that can transition toward that? What kind of political actors do we need at the moment who can start to set people up to be the people who could implement a paradigm shift like that?
Well, definitely Bernie, but my argument was always that it's still insufficient. Bernie in itself was just short of a paradigm shift, and it wasn't clear in terms of messaging what was, if he was more radical, if that would get more people on or not. But I think it was just the right mix, and the establishment and the electorate basically, and the commentariat basically made a mistake by not allowing the truth of that emergence to come out. And so that's one answer, right? Because I'm engaged with that. But my more abstract answer, right? That's the reason I mentioned international relations. It's like, I've read Paul Hartzog, and it was nice to see those types of citations in Bryan's work, right? Because these are the theorists who think about these things seriously, these long-term systems, right? And so, I think we could have a lot of convergence there, but again, it comes down to Bryan is anchored in what he thinks are the fundamentals, and I'm just calling it fundamentalism, because I'm not anti-market, but Bryan is anti-state, right? And the truth is, those are just objects for our consideration in the theorization. You can't just do away with it overnight. But in the long run, there is evolutionary kind of factors at work on the macro scale, that there is going to be a world state or a panarchic global community or some sort of global governance, right? And there's going to be some idea of statehood and some idea of military and police still. And so, keeping those things in mind, we can be honest about transitioning to that through genuine anti-establishment politics, open discourse. And so the equation of the false equivalence, rather, of Bernie and Trump, on the face of it, it's true. They're both anti-establishment. At least that's how the campaigns went in 2016. But let's all ask ourselves an honest question. Is Trump really anti-establishment? Is he really? Who did he pick in his cabinet, right? How is he governing? And it reveals that there's conflicting establishments. And is Bernie an authentic anti-establishment candidate? And the answer is absolutely yes. He's not the same as Trump. So look at Bernie's career, not look at the one-dimensional image of them on a podium, but look at their careers. Look at Bernie's lifetime career as a public servant, and look at Trump's lifetime career as a con artist and a grifter. And I'm not trying to be sensational or hyperbolic. That's what it fucking is. Be honest about what Trump is as a type of capitalist monster. And this isn't like Trump derangement syndrome. Like, I can find him funny, I can find him entertaining, but that doesn't mean he's not complicit in the ongoing deep evil of allowing things like a pandemic to flourish, or race riots to flourish. Because Trump is not a fundamentally good person. He doesn't have axioms and principles other than profit seeking. And that is what distinguishes the left and the right in this sense. And so the left does not want to force other people to live their way. It's a fundamental misconception. This is about moving progress forward for everybody. And we can only realize that if we actually, in good faith, like foreground that, accept those premises, and try to tease out the specifics of it.
Bryan, give me your take on this, because I have this sense that on the left, speaking very generically, there's a tendency to be really interested in systemic insights. How do systems operate? And on the right, there's this tendency to think that our inherited ethical instincts tell us something about how systems should be set up, even if we don't understand that. As long as we act in accordance with those ethics, systems will run accordingly. On the other hand, it seems like there's a lot of wiggle room on the right to support seemingly very unethical characters like Mr. Trump. What do you make of that whole setup I just outlined?
A couple things. What you've basically outlined is communal versus agenic bias, which I talk a lot about. And I do think that the right is sort of biased towards agency, biased towards interior causation, and the left is biased towards communion and biased towards exterior causation. So
do you think the right's, are you saying the right's biased somewhat in favor of Trump because of his agency, even at the expense of his ethics?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I do think there's part of that. Part of voting for Trump is a big fuck you towards not only what the right would see as the liberal establishment, but just the elitism in general that has sort of bubbled out of the media and academic establishments in particular. It's kind of one of the things that I think I would think that Brent would agree to is that, the establishment left, I'm not talking about the Bernie left, but the establishment left has by and large left the working class guy high and dry. And so that was taken advantage of by the populist right. And the working class guy is by and large a very agentic person. They are tradition. They're sort of, they believe in their own power, and then when they see that being laughed at, they want to say "fuck you." I'm going to do what I want, and so one of the mistakes I think that the left does is that it looks at at that group of people and it starts demonizing them, and it says, you're ignorant, you're deplorable, you're a racist. And that just pisses them off more because they know they're not. And so they're just going to say, you know what, fuck you. So I think there's a lot of that going on. And as we, over the last 10 years, maybe even the last 20 years, I think what we've seen is, Brent says that we're moving more and more to the right, but that's a leftist perspective. It's accurate in the sense that those on the right are moving further and further to the right, but it's also true that those on the left are moving further and further to the left. And you can see this in, there's been a number of studies and so on about that, how basically the centers are moving apart. Okay. And then the other thing that has happened that I think is really interesting is that even though the right is moving more fundamentally to the right towards agency, the right has integrated a lot of things from the left and taken them with them, especially around ideas of the in-group, who the in-group is. And so you see figures on the right that are gay, people of color, trans, and they're accepted. by the right. They're loved by the right. So to say that the right, to characterize the right as the left often does in terms of being sort of backward and racist and ignorant and all of those things, I think that speaks to a huge misunderstanding of what's happening on the right.
Brian, for me, for a second, imagine.
Can I counter that quick? And then you can ask Brian again. Just to, I want to partially agree, right? Just to, try to converge. So I agree on the polarization that the left goes further left, at least seemingly. But the center is moving right. Right. So the broader truth is the whole spectrum is being pulled right. So there is a polarization, but the center, which is like the Hillary Clintons and the Joe Bidens, who were both.
That's not what the data shows.
No, it is. It is what the data, whatever data you're referring to. That is what
to the Washington Post that basically shows that the center is moving. The center is moving slightly left, but the bigger thing that's happening is that the left is leaving the center behind. And so what you have is you have a lot of leftists that are just like former leftists, people like Dave Rubin, who you say is now right wing. Yeah. Well, his views haven't changed. His views are the same as they were when he was working for the Young Turks.
We're talking about a relatively narrow set of views, like he's gay, right? So he's gone and found a home on the gay, a home on the right. But so
he's gay, largely, he's pro-choice,
but largely, okay, this perfect example. He's pro-choice. Okay, the right-wing Supreme Court is pro-life. They don't want choice. So Dave Rubin doesn't even know that he's a useful idiot for the right. That is what's happening. And so some of these figures, I'm not going to speak for all of them, but they're being tokenized, right? So Dave Rubin becomes, and Peter Thiel, the right has adopted all these leftist values. We're talking about a narrow set of social values that they don't actually support in policy. They just support.
I disagree.
Yeah.
What I think
disagree on what they're trying to do with the Supreme Court.
No, well,
the facts of what they're trying to do.
First of all, I disagree with what your characterization that the right is tokenizing people. What I think is happening is that the right is just has a larger tent. The right is more
they have power
accepting. The right is more accepting of people who have different values and are willing to have discussions with people who differ from them. Where what you see on the left is what we've been calling cancel culture, where you cannot have a differing view from the dogma of the left. You have to subscribe to that dogma. Otherwise, you get shut down.
Because the right is capturing. The right is capturing it, right? So you're saying, the right is big tent. It's letting all these views in. It's not honoring that diversity. It's capturing those views to gain and hold political power. So the actual left has been stripped of its mobilizing power by the center, by the Hillary Clintons and the Joe Bidens. And so they're getting more power, and the right is getting more power, but neither of them are really honoring those types of values that you're saying, like gay rights and whatnot. They're doing it. It's lip service. It's in speech only, in name only, that they value those things. Where the actual policies for systemic reform, like a Green New Deal, like Medicare for All, come from the left. And we want that to be the new center. We want that to be the new center.
Institutional left is tokenizing those things, that they're tokenizing the Green New Deal and tokenizing anti-racism and tokenizing progressives.
The liberal center does. They greenwash and they blackwash and they whitewash history. And this is, again, as a function of kind of the profit motive.
Now, Brian, do you think of the liberal center as left? Because Brent seems to think of it as right compared to what he's talking about.
Well, you'd have to describe the liberal center. If you're talking about Hillary Clinton and
Joe Biden, that kind of
they're
thing.
left.
And
definitely.
people who support the kind of economy we have right now, but with an overlay of rhetorical woke politics.
That's all, to me anyway, that's all on the left.
All right.
So that's all serving, that
Brent,
is
do you
serving
see
the
that
left.
stuff as being on the left?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, it's on the left if it's left of where you are on the right or whatever. But Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and Barack Obama now, like there was once hope for Obama that he would be more radical, more effective. But that illusion has broken down, right? That establishment it is the liberal establishment. I'm not trying to give it my own flavor. That's what it is. It is against the left. And so there's a lot of miscommunication when people use the term the left, what they're referring to.
If it's against the left, why is it covering for the left?
How? I mean, Joe Biden is still against many of Bernie's fundamental platform points. Like he's not, they're not, we wish we were integrated into that, right?
Well,
because
they don't disavow Antifa. They don't, that took them forever even to speak out against the violence that's been going across.
Is that the benchmark for you? Denouncing Antifa? Like, let's have a sociological discussion about what protests, social movements, and riots actually are. Because most of the people controlling those conversations don't have a fucking clue. People like Tim Pool, again, are just saying, oh, Antifa, they're the real fascists. And they're pointing and looking and curating certain angles to make protesters look bad. It's a really
there's a difference between
privileged perspective to take about those crowds and just say, oh, Antifa's the real problem.
Both myself and I would say Tim Pool, if you actually listen to him, make a distinction between protesters and Antifa. There's a difference. I am absolutely 100% behind protesters and their right to protest. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I have a problem with are these groups of Antifa thugs, basically, that go into these neighborhoods and start committing arson and
it's super ironic because you call yourself an anarchist. I know you're not that kind of anarchist. You're an anarcho-capitalist.
No, I'm not that kind of anarchist.
You're not that kind of anarchist, and I'm not either, right? But you don't need my denunciation. It's like these are social phenomenon that are to a large extent just manifest because we fail to understand them. Now, I think the paradigm shift that we're all trying to go through isn't necessarily that we conceive and we execute. It's about understanding. If we can actually understand the change that's happening, then we'll just get through it. The paradigm shift is happening. But with the 2016 and 20 election, it's just been a clusterfuck of a culture war, and people who genuinely don't understand what's happening have been leading that conversation. And so it's so important that we foster understanding here and try to build consensus, and could not do that without laymen, right? We need this type of mediation. We need this type of voluntary subjection and trust exercises. Because a lot of what you describe is fundamentally third way. It's what's called third way. And integral played a large role in third way politics. And it just reproduces and reifies the neoliberal center and tribalism.
I am not for third way politics. I've written about that. I'm not.
Okay, good. Because it is a typically integral thing that
it is.
A lot of moderates, and centrists. So we don't want to recreate something like that totally doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So
and I agree with you that we need to sit down and try to understand all these different sides. But if a group of guys in black hoodies and Molotov cocktails are going to come and try and destroy my home or my business, I don't have the luxury to try and understand them. Okay, I'm just going to start shooting.
Right. I mean, I'm like yourself. You have a long-term vision. I'm trying to do a more prefigurative politics and say, how can we have a healthier society that avoids these situations? And it's going to be a tough pill to swallow on the face of it. I'm certainly not holding a gun to anyone's head, but the socialist movement, if we unpack what that is, addresses directly these types of sociological dysfunction that emerge. And it emerges from it's overdetermined, right? By bad media ecologies, by austerity and economic deprivation, and, the medicalization of society, and, it's just everything's distorted, right? So that's how we got into this situation of just people leaning into their political tribes and not trying to understand the broad history of the suppression of socialism in the United States and what a natural emergence of that cultural zeitgeist would look like? It looks like Bernie Sanders. And it, again, most of the people I clash
Not
with
historically,
over that,
though. It doesn't look like Bernie Sanders.
they just don't.
Historically, it looks like Stalin and Mao. That's what it historically looks like.
No, I mean, that's
everywhere
that's
it's been tried.
This is a wording thing, right? Like, the word socialism doesn't necessarily mean either of those two things. It's a generic word, and it could be kicked around in either
That's right.
direction. And maybe we need better terminology, right? Maybe neither of those things should be called socialism, but we could just call them.
Well, yeah, that's the same problem you have with capitalism, the term capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. So
exactly the same problem.
It seems to me that, the generic concepts that we all hold are part of the problem of the system that we're stuck in, that we need to get more precise. That when somebody talks about capitalism for or against, we don't quite know what they're saying yet. And when someone talks about socialism for or against, we don't quite know what they're saying yet. And
I tried to make this point earlier.
We know what each other are saying under these words. We come to a stalemate in our conversation together. Now, I want to check in with you guys because we've been at this for a while, and I have some kind of imaginary final questions in my mind. But where do you guys think we're at in this conversation? We've gone back and forth on a number of topics. I'm curious about whether you think a little more structure, you want to do a little more free-for-all. How close together do you feel like you are, morally and emotionally? Is there anywhere else you guys would like to go with this conversation?
I think we've done a good job of mapping out the fault lines, like I did a bit of research into Bryan to establish that with like his Twitter patterns and some of the articles he's written. And, I think it's not clear if we've made any progress, but I'm thankful for the opportunity. I'm sure Bryan is too, just to like listen to each other and to say our bits and foreground that. But really, again, I'm always trying to foreground like the depth of the problem, sort of predetermine some of these outcomes. So we have a debate and we're going to go our separate ways. And I'm saying to Bryan and to so many other people, like it's not my worldview against yours or whoever's. It's like the field of sociology and social movements have been co-opted and suppressed, and it's just part of the legacy of human history, if not capitalism. And again, I'm not advocating for Stalinism or Maoism. I'm advocating for something much more contemporary, something like really informed and historicized. And that discourse, like, still hasn't broken through, right? Bernie Sanders really sort of mainstreamed the discussion a bit. It's moved some people in the culture across the aisle back to the left, but by and large, the trend is still to the right, to this kind of death spiral and to the center death spiral that is reproducing a lot of the problems at the root level.
Bryan, how do you think we're doing, and is there anywhere you'd like us to still go in this conversation?
I appreciate Brent and him coming and talking with me about this. I find it extremely valuable to have these conversations, even though we don't agree. I think it's great to have these kind of conversations. I would say that where we need to go, I mean, for me, like, I want Brent to have the type of community that he wants. I want that for anybody, but I want to have the type of community that I want. And so what I'm trying to advocate for is for everyone to have the freedom to do that. The problem is that the society that we live in does not allow that. And so the reason why these conversations get so heated, I think, is because we all know that. We all know that one side will win and one side will lose. And that sort of that battle gets fought every 4 years or whatever. And it's a zero-sum game, politics is. But it doesn't need to be, and I don't want it to be. That's what I'm trying to push with panarchy, is that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game if we just shift our paradigm. So I think having having that kind of conversation is very valuable for this community.
Bryan, earlier you talked about what you feel is the need for people on both sides to support anti-establishment candidates and people who sort of stand up against their team. And one of the things I'm curious about, a place where I'd like to end is, from your point of view, other people who might think they agree with you, or seem to someone like Brent that they agree with you, maybe other conservatives and libertarians, what do you see as the major failing there? What's your number one critique of libertarians, let's say?
My number one critique of libertarians is that they spend too much time arguing amongst themselves and not enough time arguing against the establishment. Libertarians, you get 10 libertarians in a room and they're going to argue about the fine points of libertarianism. They're not going to argue about, or they're not going to organize and sort of figure out how they can, push their larger objective forward. So, I mean, yeah, that can be extremely frustrating.
And the corollary for you, Brent, is like, what's your number one critique of other people who identify as progressive socialists?
Yeah, I mean, depends who we're talking about, but I draw relatively clear boundaries, right, that the election gave us between like the Bernie left, there's quite a coalition there, and the liberal establishment, right? And so that includes like Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. Anybody who ran against Bernie was not a true like anti-establishment candidate. My broad critique and the lamentation is that just that we weren't successful, that the coalition didn't become big enough, that Bernie didn't find a way to like include the establishment under his wing rather than eventually himself kind of collapsing and folding under the Democratic Party, as his sort of compromise to like vote for the lesser evil. And Chomsky does it, Michael Moore does it, we're totally opposed to those establishments, but now we literally, again, have guns to our heads with this false choice between Biden or Trump. And 2016, I was more like vote your conscience, like Green Party or whatever. And it's not necessarily a spoiler. There's a lot of myths behind those types of thinking. People ultimately should be able to vote however, but this time around, I gladly lean into the position to say vote Biden, but like protest him on day, like keep protesting him, protest him on day one in office, and just keep pushing because we have a platform, right? Like the center and the right does not. They want business as usual, and like it's based on this illusion that that's creating freedom, and like that's not freedom for everybody. And so I guess my closing point on this sentiment would be that like I agree, it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. I don't think it is a zero-sum game if the socialist movement broadly gets its basic demands, right? Because we're not asking to ruin the economy. We're proposing a paradigm shift that enables more freedom. So something like universal basic income is something like we can converge on across the political spectrum often. And the only way to enable that through the state is to vote for it, not to leave it to private industry. So, I mean, that's a long way around answering your question too. Like, what is my sort of critique of other leftists? But it's generally that they're, and it's sort of like Bryan's critique of libertarians, is that the discourse becomes a bit of a cacophony. There's just too many people arguing nuanced points when we should be building a coalition. And I too myself get hung up on sort of some of the language, like the means of production and the role of unions, when really the paradigm shift I'm proposing like goes to a more root level to address those things. So if everyone has a UBI, it completely changes the nature of unions and the political project of unions. And capitalism itself is transforming so fast that it's difficult to keep up. Like job sector turnover is much higher. So how do you maintain unions for certain jobs when the turnover is very high? I mean, it might work very well with sectors that aren't going to go away, like garbage or plumbing in Bryan's case, but you know, at the end of the day, what matters is that nobody's left out. And my critique of the left is just that they weren't aggressive enough in building that coalition and consensus. And at the end of the day, though, it's not their fault. You know, the media and these establishment candidates did not give them the time of day, and they continued to demonize rising stars like AOC instead of actually listening to her. And fundamentally, you know, this isn't a left problem, but a center and a right problem. It's like those voices do get discredited because they're female or they're ethnic or whatever it is. And so, you know, I want to have a serious discourse that's built off of those foundations.
I appreciate that. And I think, I mean, I remain faithful and optimistic that there is some kind of advanced convergence between progressive policy update suggestions for our current society and the basic underlying moral insights that conservatives rally around and place their trust in as a way to move forward in society. Nonetheless, I'd like to thank you both for participating in this. I'd like to remind everyone who's watching that I'm wonderful. And this is a very complex topic, and there's still a lot of work to go on, but these kind of events are the very kinds of things I think we need in order to make any kind of progress.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Give us your feedback, audience.